Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols, and today I'm going to show you how to create these adorable stitched tree tags and treat wraps using the Get Thready Tag Tree and Tree Treat Wrap die collections. It all starts with the Get Thready Tree Tag die collection. There are stitching dies, a tag base, stars, and a die to cut out the tree trunks. I'll also use the Tree Treat Wrap die collection. To do the stitching, I'm using a tapestry needle and also the Light Effects embroidery floss in red and green. I'll be using walnut wood tree trunks. For decorating the trees, I have beads from my own crafty stash and bits and pieces silver drip drops. For ink, I'm using the Nocturne VersaFine Clair. I'm also using Mocha with a blender brush. I'm using a die from the Itty Bitty Tags 1 die collection and the Itty Bitty Sentiments Holiday Stamp Set. I'm using Copic Opaque white ink, chocolate truffle liquid watercolor, and a water brush to add splatters. I'm using burlap twine, a crocodile for punching holes, foam squares, and multi-medium matte. I'm starting things off by die cutting out all of the larger pieces that I need for my project. I'm cutting the stitching dies out of Cilantro cardstock. I cut out the tag base from Toffee cardstock, and I cut out the tree treat wrap die from Toffee cardstock. For a bit of extra dimension, I added shading around the edges of the trees using my blender brush with Mocha ink. Next, I added splatters to all of my die cut pieces. I used Copic Opaque white ink and chocolate truffle liquid watercolor. I pick both of these up with a water brush and then tap the brush over my finger to add splatters to my project. Now let's do some stitching on the trees. I'm using the Light Effect embroidery floss. This floss does fray a little bit more easily than regular embroidery floss, so keep that in mind as you're stitching. The shimmery effect is absolutely worth it though. I'm threading my needle with all 6 strands of the embroidery floss to stitch the trees. I'm going to show you the basic stitching that I designed for each of the trees, but of course the possibilities are endless. We're starting with the tree that has the row of stitching holes across the bottom and the 1 stitching hole at the top. I'm adhering my end of my thread to the back of the tree with a little bit of adhesive, and then to stitch the design, I start by coming up one of the holes on the corner, and then I'll take my thread and go up to the top of the tree to the top hole. Then I'll come down the back and come up the next hole, and then I'll bring that thread back up to the top. I'll repeat this all the way across the tree. You definitely want to have tension in your thread, but you don't want it to pull too tight that you're bending your paper or felt or whatever you decide to stitch your trees onto. If your thread gets in a tangle, don't panic and don't try to pull it through. Back it up, untangle everything, straighten things out, and then resume your stitching. When you complete your design, trim your thread and secure the ends down with adhesive on the back of your tree. The next tree I'm going to show you how to stitch is the one that has the holes going down each side. Once your thread is secured, you're going to want to take your needle and thread and come up one of the holes. I'm starting at the top of the tree for mine, and then I'm going to go straight across to the hole on the other side. And then I'm going to move down and have my needle come up that next hole below and go straight across to the other side again. I decided to add beads onto my thread on every other row just to add a little bit of extra bling. Just make sure you're using a bead that has a hole large enough to accommodate both your needle and thread. Keep repeating this process to add stitching and beads all the way down to the bottom of the tree. When you reach the bottom, trim your thread and secure it to the back with adhesive. I love the extra touch that the beads add to the simple stitching design. The third tree has a sort of stitching trail to create a garland. For this tree, I'm going to be using the back stitch. The idea for the back stitch is you're going to be coming up at the front of the stitch and then going down at the back of the stitch. So I'm going to come up kind of in front of where I want the stitch to go and then loop my thread back, and then I'm going to come up again at the front of the stitch and then loop my thread back. This is a pretty common embroidery stitch, and so if you need more instruction on how to do it, there are lots of resources both online and in embroidery books. You'll notice when you do these smaller stitches that you have maybe a little bit more tangling in your embroidery floss. Like I mentioned before, just slow down, back up, straighten things out, and then re-pull your thread through. When you've finished your stitching, trim your thread and secure the end on the back with adhesive. Here's a look at the 3 stitch designs and also a look at a few variations that I did. I played around with using multiple colors, trying out some different stitch patterns, and also adding beads. Next, I cut out stars from silver glitter cardstock to add to the tops of the trees. For the trees that I'm using on the tags, I'm cutting out tree trunks from Mocha cardstock. I added a tree trunk to each of the tag bases. I added a tree to each of the tags with foam squares, and then added a star to the top of each of the trees. For the tree tag with the garland stitch design, I added a few of the silver drip drops to add ornaments to the tree. The remaining trees will go on the tree treat wraps, and I added a star to the tops of each of these trees, and I also added silver drip drops to one of the trees to look like ornaments. On the tree treat wrap die cut, there are score lines to fold to create the shape of the wrap. I used a bone folder to make sure my folds were nice and crisp, and then I added a tree to each of the wraps with foam squares. A little bit of adhesive at the top secures the treat wrap together. I used a liquid adhesive to adhere the tree trunks to the bottom of the treat wraps. I cut out 6 tiny tags with a die from the Itty Bitty Tags 1 die collection, and then used the Nocturne VersaFine Clair ink to stamp the A Gift for You sentiment from the Itty Bitty Sentiments holiday stamp set onto each of the tags. For the tree tags, I threaded the tiny tag at the top where I added the burlap twine. And then for the treat wrap, I punched a hole with my crocodile hole punch at the top of the tree, and then I tied a piece of burlap twine through the hole to attach the tiny tag to the top of the treat wrap. My stitched tree tags and treat wraps are done, and I love how they turned out. I can't wait to attach the tags to holiday gifts and add little chocolates inside my treat wraps to give to my friends and family. Supplies that I used for this project can be found in the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you next time.